You're watching T.C. McCarthy, the most handsome and entertaining science fiction author on video. What are we going to talk about again today? Well, before we get to that, what am I going to tell you? Yes, buy my book, Pre-Order Tyger Burning. You can get it now, and it'll be delivered to you as soon as it's published in July of this year. Pre-ordering helps me get on the bestsellers list, pew, and I did a video right here explaining how that works. All right, what are we going to talk about today? Well, we're going to continue in this vein of near-space disasters. Well, they actually were space disasters, but they weren't fatal. I'll go ahead and give you the punchline up front. The one I'm going to talk about today, the cosmonauts in this case, because it was Soviet. The cosmonauts survived, but man, what a ride. And it really, after researching all the history of the Soviet space program, if I had to be in a space program, the Soviet one would be my last choice. Now today it's really safe. Their Soyuz capsules are very, very reliable, but back then when they were just getting started, no way. No way would I have gotten inside one of those things. This particular mission we're going to talk about is Soyuz 23, and there were some interesting failures or mishaps kind of on either side of it, 21 and 24, but we're not going to talk about those today. 23, what happened was that it launched, successfully entered orbit, and was supposed to dock with the Salyut space station and failed to dock whatsoever. Just couldn't dock. What had happened was that the craft had begun to oscillate, and the cosmonauts on board couldn't figure out why, but they were going too fast and making too many movements to have any chance of successfully docking, so they aborted the first attempt. And because of fuel situations, the cosmonauts wanted to try again, but because of fuel situation, basically they were told, nope, 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 we're aborting, come back to Earth. And they were very, very disappointed in that decision, but they followed orders. Now, the irony here is that at the time, they thought the mission was over, and really what was happening was that their troubles were just beginning. Their craft had let them down, and more was to come very soon after that. Now, at that point, a previously very obscure lake, I think in Kazakhstan, Lake Tengiz, it's a saltwater lake, basically, and it was about to play a prominent role in the return of these astronauts. Their cosmonauts. Their craft came down, parachutes deployed, but this was in wintertime, and there were wild winds at the time. There was a blizzard going on where they were landing, and so the Soyuz basically drifted 75 miles off course. The astronauts expected to thud into hard ground after the retros fired, but instead they splashed down in the middle of Lake Tengiz, in the middle of nowhere, possibly one of the most difficult areas that they could have chosen for rescuers to get to their aid. Now, outside, the temperatures were minus 22 degrees Celsius, freezing cold. So the astronauts knew that if they opened their hatch, because they were in the water, I think their primary parachute had begun to fill with water and kind of dragged them over to the side. They couldn't open their forward hatch unless they wanted to risk letting in a whole bunch of freezing cold water. So instead, what they did was they risked opening a vent to let in some air, because still they were on oxygen and they were going to run out of that soon. And so they risked letting in some air that way, but it was freezing cold, so they got out of their pressure suits and waited, hopefully, for rescue to come. At that point, things got worse. The salt corrosion set off the charges for the secondary parachute. So now the secondary parachute fires, it opens, fills with water, and begins dragging the craft over further. Now at that point, I'm not sure how much time had elapsed, but it was at least several hours. A helicopter finally spotted the Soyuz 23 craft listing in Lake Tengiz, but they couldn't get to it. The helicopter ordered the Soyuz cosmonauts to put on their water rescue suits to try and keep themselves warm. The helicopter tried to hover over it, but because of weather conditions, they tried twice, I think, and had to basically abort. Then, because the helicopters couldn't get to them, they tried amphibious tractor vehicles. Those could only get so far and couldn't reach them. Finally, I think one of the helicopter pilots got out and inflated a rubber raft and went out to the craft on the rubber raft and finally got there. But what's he going to do on a rubber raft? There's not much he can do to help get them to shore. So after all these kinds of trials at rescuing these guys, keep in mind, they're still running out of oxygen. I think at some point they had to close the vent. So the time was clicking. They could hear the astronauts starting to get tired, slur their words, and the rescuers on the ground, when they were interviewed, said they could almost feel the CO2 building up to the point where they knew if they didn't do something quickly, these astronauts were going to die. These cosmonauts were going to die. So finally what happened was that I think the guy in the rubber raft helped a helicopter successfully link up to the Soyuz craft, the helicopter was unable to winch it up. Too much ice had formed and it was too heavy, so they couldn't winch it up. So instead what they did was start to drag it across Lake Tengiz to one bank. That had never been tried before. Any number of things could have gone wrong, including the helicopter crashing and dragging the entire assembly down into the lake. The lake wasn't that deep. I think the deepest point was 20 feet, but all it would have taken was 5 feet of water to basically wind up with this thing on the bottom and the Soyuz cosmonauts dying in place. Fortunately, that didn't happen. They finally got to the edge of the lake. The Soyuz astronauts emerged, took a deep breath, and everyone was okay. So this is one of these things that had a happy ending. But again, you know, I mentioned in an earlier video, I'll link to it here or here. In an earlier video, I mentioned that we did not have much faith in the Soviet space program and knew that they were taking too many chances, and that it had been, at the start of it anyway, it had been a hodgepodge of really poor engineering and design decisions that resulted in these kinds of things happening more often than not. So that's all I've got for this video. Again, buy my book, pre-order it. I'll put a picture of it here. Pew! Tyger burning. It'll be published in July of 2019. End transmission. Hey, TC McCarthy here, the most eclectic and entertaining science fiction author on YouTube, maybe even the internet. Thanks for watching this video. I really appreciate you guys tuning in. As usual, buy my books. I've got a new one coming out in July, and I'll have a giveaway coming up soon, so stay tuned for that. Appreciate you subscribing to my channel, and please, 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 please don't forget to click that little bell icon so that whenever I upload new content, you get notified. Thanks again. See you soon.